You are in for an interesting ride.
Hello and welcome to another ET Newsroom interview. In this episode, I shall be joined by Mike Clelland, and you may or may not know Mike for his synonymous link with owls and their mysterious appearance, often presaging an ET event. Not all the time, but often. And Mike has gone deeply into the mythos of owls in legends, in folklore. But isn't it funny how they turn up so frequently around experiences of things extraterrestrial, ultra-terrestrial, or whatever other name you want to use for them? Regarding owls, I have a little story of my own. I was thinking about inviting Mike for an interview, and I was in two minds for one reason or another. So, in pondering, I was having a coffee. I plugged myself in and was listening to a reading for my star sign from tea leaves, and I'm not really drawn to that sort of thing. So I was about to shut it down when the lady reader said, "Oh, look," she said, "there's an owl, a big owl." And I thought, oh, yeah, okay then. Now I can never see what they see. But on this occasion, I could quite clearly see that it was an owl there. And I thought, okay then, that's my sign to give Mike a call and invite him for an interview. It's also fascinating because Mike and I actually met in 2013. I was interviewing people at the International UFO Congress, and Mike and I just had a very brief chat. I do remember it was all quite new, and I don't think Mike had really burst onto the scene and become so well known as he is now. So that's just another little interesting side note. And so with that, it's seatbelt time. Buckle up. I'm going to ask Mike if he'll start with some of his childhood experiences, because for the longest time, I didn't really think that you were an experiencer till a few years down the road. So let's just start with your early experiences and how you came to recognize them for what they are.
Okay, so I'm 61 years old now. In 1974, I was 12, and I have a few events from 1974. One of them was what I consider a close-up sighting of something out a window. I was a boy. I was at a sleepover, and it was at a friend of mine. He grew up right down the street from me, but he had moved, but he didn't move far, so I got dropped off at his house and I had a sleepover there. It probably wasn't that late, but it was dark outside, and we were upstairs, and I remember we walked into his bedroom, and the lights were off in the bedroom, so that allowed for a little easier to see out the window. I remember that very clearly, and it was either him or me. His name is Kenny. Kind of went, "What is that?" And we walked right up to the window, and we rushed, and we put our faces right up against the glass. Some people have said, "Oh, do you think it's something behind you?" And I was like, no, 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 like something reflected. I'm like, no, no, no. Like we were right up against the glass. And it was the shape of a coffee can, and it was rotating, and it was coming down at this odd angle. You can't really tell that this is rotating, but I'm rotating it. So it's descending at an odd angle, right? A helicopter would go like this, but this was descending at an odd angle. So it was cylindrical, like shaped like a coffee can.
Okay.
Yeah, so this was a less than cylindrical, and it seemed to be metallic. It had lights on it, and had like what amounted to a pencil sticking out the top, like this, right? So you got kind of that kind of thing. And now it's interesting because I remember this part, and so does he. But there was a blinking light in the night sky. It went blink, 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 and it looked like nothing at all, like an airplane. If you saw an airplane on a nighttime sky, it would blink there, it would blink there, it would blink there. You could just follow its progress across the sky each time it blinked. And I knew, I had this sense that when they met, it was going to turn off. I just knew, I had this total knowing. So this is interesting. I guess I've said this many times, but like built right into this event was sort of I don't want to say a psychic knowing, but a very true sense of knowing that when this little blinking light met, because they were on a little collision course, and when they met, this was going to turn off. So that's exactly what happened. Blink, 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 and then this coffee can shaped object just gone. Now, I remember at the time when I would tell the story as a boy, I would never say that it vanished. I would say the lights turned off. And that was partially just out of embarrassment. I mean, the implications of it vanishing were too strange. Having the lights simply turn off seemed more believable and logical. Since then, I've read a lot of UFO accounts where they just vanish, poof, in the moment. And I'm now at total peace saying it vanished. But I remember cautiously like editing my own story out of sheer politeness. So it vanished, and then both him and I ran downstairs. And earlier in the day, we had pencils and papers and stuff on the kitchen table. So we went downstairs. They were still on the kitchen table. We started drawing. We both drew it in the moment. Like within minutes of seeing it, we both drew it. I still have my image. It's on my website. It's on my blog. And then decades later, this would have probably been around 2007 or 8, I reached out to Kenny. I found him. I had to search him out online. And I asked him about, do you remember that night? And he said, no, I don't remember that night at all. And then he got back to me a few days later and he said his mother remembered us coming downstairs and drawing it at the kitchen table. So she didn't actually see it, but she remembered the event of us drawing it. Yeah.
And in that moment when you guys, little boys, were both drawing it, did you have a discussion about what that was?
Oh, we were very animated and very excited about it. Oh, I'm sure we were talking a mile a minute about it. What I do remember is that I'm an illustrator, so I want a visual aid here. So let me just draw this real quick.
I think that's fascinating that he doesn't remember, because I've also heard that kind of report from other people, especially when they've had sightings as children. The one remembered it and the other didn't.
What he said, and I remember at the time, and this is interesting, I'll do this with the pen. Can I do it like this? He said that the edges were more beveled. But I was like, I remember saying, oh, you're right, it was. I drew it as a true coffee can. And he said, no, the edges right at the edge, right there were beveled slightly. And I remember saying, oh, you're right. And then you can see on my drawing, which was pencil, where I erased it and drew in the beveled edge, that would have happened close to 50 years ago. So that was one event. So it's interesting because after that, I remember there was a point when I started reading UFO literature, probably in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, and it turned into something quite compulsive. I was reading a lot of it. And I remember even earlier on when I would hear about reports of UFO sightings, I would think, well, I saw something. Why should I doubt them? Because I don't doubt myself. I mean, I know what I saw. It doesn't match anything. There was another event also in 1974, also when I was 12 years old. And I was walking. There was a high school right up the road from me, and they had football games on Friday night. It was a real common thing. It was total like kids in the neighborhood. It was a neighborhood thing to do. All the kids were there. High school kids, and I was not in high school yet. I would have been what would be middle school, but we all went to the high school football game on Friday nights. And I walked home with another friend. His name was also Mike, and so it's not that far from my house. So you could stand in my front yard and hear the football game from my front yard. So it wasn't that far. So it was not too long of a walk. So we walked home, and there was a point down the block from me where I could point to the spot right on the sidewalk. I could take chalk and make an X on the sidewalk right where I was standing. And there was a point when the sky totally lit up orange, like click on, click off. So nighttime sky, autumn, this was football season is in the autumn. So a beautiful, calm autumn night in the Midwest and not cloudy. And so for just 1 second, like click, click, it was nighttime sky, orange, nighttime sky. And my memory is the whole sky lit up bright orange. So we walked home. So there's no UFO. Well, I walked to my house, and then he lived further down through the neighborhood. So I just said goodbye in my driveway. He kept on walking. I went into the house. And when I walked in, my parents were angry at me. They were waiting for me. They were like, where have you been? I was like, what do you mean, where have I been? It's 9:30. I knew I was going to be home in time to see a television show. I told them ahead of time, I will be home at 9:30 to see the television show. I remember leaving the football game, giving myself plenty of time, walk in the door. My parents were angry. Why are you out so late? I'm like, I'm not out late. It's 9:30. they pointed to the clock. Actually, the television was on, and they had what's the 11 o'clock news. I don't know what's going on lately. This was back on network television. So the network news would come on at 11 p.m. and it would end at 11:30. So the 11 o'clock news was just ending. So that meant that I was missing approximately 2 hours of missing time. Now, I this was long before the term missing time had become a catchphrase. And so I had no understanding of why or what had happened. What I do remember very clearly is I was like, no, like I was mad at my parents. You should not be upset with me. I came home on time, though the clock on the wall
said different.
Obviously, that was not true, but my intentions, I left the football game, a very short walk, just a few blocks away. I could, and then I was late coming home.
Was Mike there with you when the orange sky happened?
Yes. Oh yeah, we talked about it right in the moment. I remember we said, is that a helicopter? Is that lightning? And you know what I remember we even said there's like these little transformer things, or not little, they're these great big sort of garbage pail size cans on some of they're called transformers, and they're on the telephone poles.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, did one of those explode? I remember we had that conversation. Did one of those things on the phone poles explode? So the next Monday at school, little kids hanging out in the cafeteria, I said, you know, something weird happened on Friday night when we were coming home from the football game. And he said, yeah, we saw a UFO with lights and everything. And that really struck me, because I was like, whoa, 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 I didn't see a UFO. Where did that come from? Like, why would you say that? And my very first impression was, this is how stories get blown out of proportion. I thought he was lying or exaggerating. I have since contacted Mike just a couple of years ago. It took me a long time to find him. And I asked him about that night. And he said, like, oh, I don't remember anything. I have no memory at all of that night. But he did say, I do remember your parents were angry at you. I remember that part, which is an odd detail.
Absolutely. And did he have any missing time?
None at all. Not that he remembered. So, because I did quiz him on it a little bit as best I could, saying, do you remember this? I told my story. He's like, wow, I don't remember that at all. That would have been close to 50 years earlier. So, that's a long time ago.
So I wondered if Mike's parents had said something to him, you're late, or you're, whatever.
Quite honestly, he could have just walked in the house and not even talked to his parents and just gone right to bed. So there's that. Yeah. I've thought exactly that and just wondered, like, what would explain that? And then that would be the simplest explanation. That's the age of 30, in 1993. This one's a little tougher to kind of brush under the rug, but I managed to brush it under the rug. So I was living alone in Maine, which is in New England, which is far north in the United States. So it was wintertime. It would have been January or February of 1993. I can't quite place when it would have been exactly. And I was alone in this house. I woke up in the middle of the night, and there was a bright light shining in the room. And the way the bed was and the way the window was, all I had to do was sit up on my elbow and I could look right out the window. So I sat up on my elbow, looked right out the window, which I did an illustration of this. I saw 5 gray beings, the classic gray aliens with the bald heads and the big black eyes and the skinny bodies. 5 of them were walking towards the house. And behind them, they were backlit by this bright light. Now, it would be perfect if it was a flying saucer that was emanating light. It wasn't like that. It was kind of small, the light source. It was like the size of a washing machine, like this kind of small thing that was behind the 5 beings, but it was smaller. It was strange, oddly, curiously small. And the way that looked out, I mean, the driveway was a little off to the side. It was wintertime and there was actually a garden out there. It was all covered in snow at that point. Now, so I looked at this, right? That's a scary sight. 5 beings. I'm the only one home. Like there's like the next house is a few hundred yards away. They were walking towards I was the only one in that house. There's no, like, they were coming for me. So like, that was very, very clear. I had this voice in my head that said, oh yes, they're here. Now is the time to put your head on the pillow and shut down. And I just lay down, put my head in, boom, I was out instantly. So there was only like maybe 30 seconds of this memory. And then the next morning, I didn't even bother to go out and see if there were footprints in the snow. It was so absurd. I just dismissed it outright as impossible. presently, I feel strongly there was something that took place that night. When I drew the image years later, so that would have been about 93, I probably drew the image in 2006. So that's 11 or 12 years later, 13 years later or so, which is a long time. But I'll tell you, when I was drawing, so I'm a professional illustrator, have done illustration work all my life. And when I was drawing that, the emotional charge of that, like the out and out nervousness of trying to capture that, didn't equate with other illustration things I'd drawn, right? I've drawn all kinds of things all my life. I don't get emotional about the things I draw, but this was a really tough thing. Like, it was almost like I had to fight to draw this. And then I'll also say, I knew that I had one chance to draw this, because what I then would draw, I knew would become my memory, right? So when I think about this now, I'm thinking of the drawing less than the real event.
Have you any idea of the sense of time that you woke up? Would you be aware of what time of...
I did not look at a clock. I have no memory, and I've thought about that. I didn't look at a clock. What I can say is there was an odd detachment sort of feeling. There was an odd sense of an eerie quiet. There was an odd sense of an eerie calm. Like, I should have freaked out. I should have bolted out of bed, locked the doors, grabbed a baseball bat or a knife, and gotten ready to defend myself. I didn't do that. I just, like, I heard this voice, bloop, I just went to sleep.
And this voice, do you remember any detail of it? Was it yours, or was it
You know, it's interesting. The way I remember it is my voice. So I don't know. I mean, this is 30 years ago. Over 30 years ago. So it's tough for me to remember that. Now, what I can also say is that eerie quiet, that kind of head in the fishbowl kind of sensation, like there was a hyper clarity. Now, when I dream, like if I dream I'm in my own bedroom, there's something distorted, right? It doesn't match reality. When I have a dream, if I'm in my house, it's like, well, it's my house, but it's kind of distorted and the rooms don't quite line up, but that's not what it was like. This was exactly the interior of the bedroom, the relationship to the window. All of that was absolutely not dreamlike.
Awoke the next day remembering, thinking maybe it was a dream. Did you think that?
I was not going there. I recognized the implications of it. It was like, no way, I'm not going there. I am not going to address this as a real thing. This was a dream. No ifs, ands, or buts. I just pushed that thought out of my mind as fast as it entered. I was like, nope, not going there. Not going to consider that. Oh, here's one little odd detail. So when I started to look into my own experiences, come around 2009, 8 or 9, around there, I started going to UFO conferences, which I loved. I thought that was really rewarding to go there and just be among my tribe in a way. I would ask people, I would say, hey, do you have any memories of like a distorted sense of reality? And people would kind of say, oh, yeah. And they would say things like, oh, it got really quiet or this or that. And then I talked to one woman, she's in England. Do you know Brigitte Barclay?
I know of her. I don't know her.
Yeah. So I had a conversation with her. We were talking. She described an event she had where she was in California and in a convertible. This is such a California thing, driving a convertible through LA, and had a close-up sighting. And she said, without any prompting from me, she said, you know, when you take two magnets and they go click and they click together, and then you pull the magnets apart and you turn them 180 degrees and then try to push them together, then they repel each other. So they're no longer attracted, they're repelling each other. So you can take these magnets and try to push them together, but they won't go together, right? There's nothing you can see between the magnets, but there's some, what I consider almost like a warbling energy, like a rolling, distorted energy that does not allow you to push the magnets together. So you can feel it. You can't see it, but you can feel it. She said, you know what it was like being that close to the craft? She describes a classic flying saucer. She said, it was like being between those magnets. And when she said that, I was like, oh, she knows, because that's the best description of what I felt that night.
The next day, were you aware of any changes? Now, I don't necessarily mean that day, but over a period of time. And also, would you have been aware of any, I don't know, marks or anything on the body or attribute that began developing within you that you were able to go, oh, That's interesting. I can do that now.
This is exactly the question. So I'm doing UFO research. This is exactly the questions I ask. What I ask is what was going on in your life before, what changed after. So you're asking a tough one, right? So in order to answer this, which I've written about, I've spoken about this. So this is like, I'm not shy about bringing this up, but I'm 61. I've had a lifetime of clinical depression. It has been essentially zero for about the last decade, which is great. I have not been clinically depressed in 10 years, which is great. I could not say that for most of my life. At that point, when I was 30, I was in that house right at that winter, the winter of 92, 93. I was as depressed as I've ever been in my life. I was dangerously close to suicide at the time of that event. So you asked me what was going on in your life. I have cautiously speculated, because it's really hard to know, like what was going on in my life at that point. Wow, that was like a dangerous chapter of my life where I was at the threshold of ending my own life. It's like, I'm just saying this very plainly. It's been 30 years, but this is what was going on. So I have cautiously speculated. I don't know this, but I have considered, did they arrive, those beings arrive to lessen, to reduce the need I felt to end my life. Now I did go through a hypnosis session. There was where it was for, specifically the session was for me to come to terms with the clinical depression in my life. This would have been in 2014, a decade ago. And I worked with this woman in London. Her name is Lorraine Flaherty, but she does past life regression. I met her at a conference, and I knew she was a hypnotherapist, and I was like, I kind of want to look into this UFO stuff. And she listened to me, and I was talked about my life and everything. And she said, you probably, like, for healing, you might do better with a past life regression. So I did this. Seemingly, it played out like a dream. Like, I don't know what happened in this thing, but it was really powerful. And in the aftermath, I haven't had any clinical depression. I was essentially healed because of this couple of hours with a hypnotherapist talking about a past life. I mean, it's like, I work as an illustrator, and I've always had a difficult time with my role as a creative type. So in the past life, I was a young art student in England, and it would have been around the 1920s. And this is very fleeting, the kind of stuff that came through. And I said I was Irish, and I was studying art in England. And it was interesting because Lorraine said, what town are you from? And I went, Murray, which I've searched. There is no town in Ireland called Murray, but there is I guess it would be like a county or an area in Scotland called Murray. And my family lineage is Scottish. So that doesn't prove or disprove anything, but that was the kind of, how do you fact check something like this? So what emerged was that I had been an art student, and I was very arrogant. I was kind of prideful of my skills, of my illustration skills, of my drawing skills. And I remembered at the time which is exactly what I do now, is I would mostly do on white paper, black ink illustrations. And that's my memory then. And there came a point in the regression, it was a really interesting regret, because it was like a very quick, rapid fire call and response that I was having with her. She would ask a simple question. I would give often a very simple answer, 1 or 2 words. She would ask a simple question with ret, tet, 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 tet. Listening to the regression is really fascinating. And this stuff is just, I don't know where it was coming up from, but I had visuals in my mind. But she said, what's happening? And then there was a point when I was like, oh my God, my face hurts. She claims my face, my eyes were closed. She claims my face swelled up in her office. And I said, something's wrong with my face. And she said, what happened? And I said, somebody beat me severely, and I am now blind. I've been beaten blind. And she said, who beat you blind? And I said, my father. And then it was like so emotional. As the story played out, it was like my father felt so guilt-ridden. This is now 100 years ago, would have been in the 1920s in England, seemingly, or Scotland, and seemingly, maybe, it's hard to know. And my father was so ridden with guilt because he beat me blind, a young artist, now I'm blind, that he committed suicide. So it was just this turmoil of emotions and guilt. And so I had that dream, I'm calling it a dream. I had that hypnosis session. And then I sat up in the chair afterwards and I'm like, I am cured. I knew it. I am cured. And I have not had any clinical depression for a decade now. I get, like it rains a few days in a row, or like something normal in life doesn't work out right. I get bummed out. That's not depression. That's just a normal reaction to,
I think we all
day-to-day
have
life stuffs.
we all have that.
Yeah. But while I was under the hypnosis session, she had seen me talk at a UFO conference. She was well aware of the UFO stuff and what I was. So she asked me about the night with the 5 beings. And she said, why are they there? And I said, to save me. And she said, to save you from what? And I said, suicide. I'm very cautious to say that's true. It is certainly true that I said it. It's on the recording of me while under hypnosis. Does that mean it is literally true? If I don't know something, I'm going to say I don't know it.
And I think because these beings, these other intelligences, have a handle on our chemistry so completely that it wouldn't be difficult for them to tweak the serotonin and dopamine levels and shut down the cortisol a little bit. Very brave of you, and very, I really commend you for sharing as clearly as you have about that, because that's not easy to speak of. And I'm wondering if, as a little one, and I mean I'm talking from sort of a toddler to 3, 5, 6 years, if you would say from your remembrance that you would have been depressed as even a little child.
I would not be able to say as a little child. And I've written about this and I've speculated about this too. So my very first memories of what I would call the emotion, I did not have a name for it at that point, for the feeling of being depressed. I remember in middle school, like basically the age I was when I had the event with both the orange flash and the craft scene out Kenny's window. So 12 years old, right around there, 12. I remember walking around the middle school in a way where I just didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to pause. So I would just walk the halls at lunchtime rather than sit in the cafeteria with the other students. And I remember doing that at the time. It's plainly a manifestation of clinical depression. And so it began as 12 years old. That was my very first memory of. Now, this is, again, I'm speculating cautiously because I don't know. So if there was a missing time event, you and I are both well-versed enough to say that there's quite probably an abduction event that took place. And did the trauma, the buried subconscious trauma of that event, or let's just say the highly charged emotions of something so strange, did that trigger clinical depression in me as a child? Now, I will also add that my mother and my grandmother on the Danish side of the family have a history of clinical depression. So, there is medical precedence that.
What I find interesting too, speaking on a kind of on a sidebar level, is that, you came in with those genetics, and in a way they've allowed you to discover, and through the ET element as well as the regression, that was something that you came in to heal. I don't know whether you did much with your father in the way of forgiving him, but I'm guessing from the quantum entanglement perspective, spiritual growth perspective, that your father would have been released from his trauma. Also, how are your eyes this life?
My eyes are fine. These are pretty minimal. My eyes are great. So I have a but I just wear reading glasses, which is just a matter of aging. And the part of the reason, if I could totally do the interview like this, but I end up doing this a little bit when I don't have glasses on.
No, I just wondered if you came in with any residue
that I know of, except for the residue that I seem to have come through, which I've given this a lot of thought. The residue that I would have had would be an irrational level of insecurity or doubt, or an inability to trust my own creative abilities, my own creative process, right? I'm a very skilled illustrator. I've been drawing all my life. I've been doing creative stuff all my life. Every job I have is creative. But at the same time, I've always had this kind of schizophrenic relationship where I have this kind of, I don't fully trust my own abilities. Oh yeah, it's totally normal. I mean, having gone to art school, that's you're swimming in a world of, all your comrades at art school are struggling with those exact same insecurities. So yeah, it's not unusual, but at the same time, it did prove to be, I don't want to say crippling, but I never could fully trust it. I do much better now. Do much better now in the last 10 years. So 3 hours or
That can do it.
hypnotherapist solved, 25 years of Prozac.
How
So it just
fantastic.
ended.
I know for myself, I've healed myself just by going and visiting those memories safely. So I totally understand where you're coming from. I will just say that just before I started the record on the first segment, my electricity went off completely throughout the whole house, everything, computer gone, and it even seemed to be outside. Didn't last very long, a few minutes. I couldn't even get to the electric cupboard before it was back on. And my doorbell dinging doesn't normally do that to let me know it's back on. Just about to do segment 2, exactly the same thing happened. Now, that's never happened before, ever. So is it Mike? Is it something Mike's
Maybe.
going to share with us that certain parties don't want to be heard? I don't know. Anyway, that is very unusual. So welcome back, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope I'm all for like pushing the boundaries, and yeah, so just
Well, I don't know, but just curious, isn't it? Did you forgive your father, or has that not even been an issue?
very much so. I'm going to I wrote about this. The hypnotherapist in the session, Lorraine Flaherty, she asked, and who is your father, basically? And I, of this event that took place 100 years ago. And I said, it's the father of my lifetime now. It's my same father. Like like my father from that incarnation became my father in this incarnation. Now, what I can say is that my father's not at all like that. Like nothing. Like father was totally supportive of me in the best way that he could be, right? But no, there was no reason to need to forgive my father because he never did anything wrong. My father in this lifetime. In that lifetime, we went through a very formal process, which I thought which she had obviously done many times. I could hear it in her tone that this is just part of her process. She said, did you have an agreement with your father in that lifetime? And I went, yes. And I said, did the agreement work? And I went, no, it didn't work at all. It went too far. Like it was all too messed up. It was too, and she said, okay, well, let's take the contract and rip it up. So in my sort of meditative state there, I kind of visualized, ripping up the contract. And it was remarkably therapeutic in the sense, yes, I did go through the process of forgiving him. Oh, this person from another chapter of a previous life, I guess. So then I did reap the benefits of the experience. I have been depression-free for decades.
But I think that speaks volumes. What a great adventure and experience going deep within, and it can be pretty scary sometimes.
It was certainly emotional. Yeah. Wow. Whew. Like
I'm
just
sure
the floodgates opened. Yeah.
I've been there too. So look, I just want to keep on with your experiences before we get to the owls and the synchronicities. My goodness, we've got a lot to cover. So we met in 2013 and just had a brief chat at the International UFO Congress. Then you tell the story, because no, I'm not saying that I had anything to do with it, just it's an interview. We did touch base, but something happened on your way back.
Well, let me say that at that 2013 event that took place just outside of Fountain Hills, that's the name of the small town outside of Phoenix, I was on fire because that was when the conference was like 5 days long, but I was on fire. I was asking everyone about owls, and I got a lot of phone numbers and I got a lot of great stories. And that was really where it was like, I had already started the research on owls, but at that I was in a place where I really went for it that week. And other people have gotten back to me and said, you were kind of, obsessed, that week. And I sure was. So on the drive home from that conference in 2013, which is 11 years ago now, I visited some friends. So I lived in Idaho. The conference is in southern Arizona, and I was living in Idaho. So if you look at a map, the state of Utah is right in the way. It goes Arizona, Utah, Idaho. And I had to drive a long, long drive, beautiful drive, as pretty as any place on planet Earth. I went through the canyon countries and the red rock countries of southern Utah. The joke I make is that's where they filmed the Roadrunner cartoons. So just gorgeous. And I love that spot. And I did a lot of outdoor work where I was teaching in the outdoors. So I felt very comfortable. what I would do is I wouldn't pay for a hotel room in beautiful places like that. I would just sleep out under the stars. It's no issue at all just pulling off the side of the road in that part of the West. Everyone does it. It's well understood. So I just, on the drive home, I pulled off to the side of the road. And the owl thing had already been a big deal in my life, as I said at the conference. So I parked on the side of the road, right near a little town called Beaver, Utah, on Highway 20. It was a beautiful night, beautiful cold night, crystal clear skies, no wind. And I laid my sleeping bag down. I was just, 50 yards away from the road. And there was a spot where other people had obviously parked before, and there was the old fire rings and such. But I laid down on the ground, and I had a big thick sleeping pad and a big thick sleeping bag and a pillow, and it was beautiful. The question I ask is like, what were you doing before the event? What happened after? But so what I was doing is something I love to do, right? So this is something I love to do. I love sleeping out under the stars. So I woke up and I looked up at this hillside. This is totally middle of nowhere kind of environment. And I look up at this hillside, and on top of this hill, I say to myself, I go, that looks just like a landed flying saucer. And I had just come from the UFO conference, and I'd had little psychic events in my life. And I felt like, I felt like I was kind of hot stuff at the conference where I was, people knew me from my podcast and stuff like that. So I was like, hey man, if there's a UFO here, I should know it, right? I should feel like UFO vibes. I should know. And I looked at this thing, and I felt nothing at all. I'm like, it's some round building up on that hillside. So I rolled over and went to sleep. Now the image that I saw, or very clearly saw, because I woke up a few more times, it was just looked like a giant cylinder, like a section of a cylinder on a hilltop with lights around the circumference of it. Dot, 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 dot. And I was like, somebody's got a big round house up there. So I woke up at another point during that night, and there was a coyote howling near my head. Now, I have slept out west 1,000 nights in my life, and I've heard a lot of coyotes, and I have never, ever, ever heard one that close or that loud. In retrospect, I'm looking at this as like mythic symbolism. Right? It was weird that it was that close and that loud. Like, it was close. Like, I sat up, I could not figure out why I couldn't see it. It felt like if I had a dog biscuit, I could have just handed it to the thing. It wasn't there. So I woke up a third time, and my feet were, the way I was lying, my car was behind me, and my feet were pointed towards this big juniper bush, and there was a light behind the bush. I I sat up and I did the thing, you kind of want to look, what's behind there? So I couldn't make it out, and I was like, I laid down. So the round house was still on the hill. I noticed it each time I woke up. I woke up the next morning before the sun came up. I got in my car and started driving. It's interesting, and I've said this before, I do not remember actually seeing the round structure on the hill before driving away. I certainly could have, but I simply don't have any memory of seeing it. I get home, it's like an 11-hour drive from that parking lot to my house. So I left at, let's say, 5 in the morning. I get home in the afternoon, and the first thing I did is I sat down and looked up on Google Maps. What is that round building? What was that round building? There's nothing on Google Maps. And I was like, well, the Google Maps, maybe the building just got built, right? So the Google Map picture could have been taken a little while ago. The thing has gotten built, and I've since been back to that site many times. There's nothing on that hill, and it's big. It's like on a map, which I'm very skilled at using maps. I was 2.5 miles between where I was lying on the ground and where that structure was. Now, in the clear desert air, you can see a house 2.5 miles away, but it would have had to have been big. Whatever that thing was, that told me, the distance told me it was really big. So there's nothing on that hill. There's no road up that hill. There's no house on that hill. I've been back. Wasn't like it was hidden, So I spent, March 10th, 2013 was the night I slept out. That was a Sunday. Monday, March 11th, I think I've got this right. March 11th, I drove home and I did a drawing of the building on the hillside. I did a very accurate sketch of it. I used Photoshop, it's in color, and people said, how did you get that photograph? I'm like, it's not a photograph, it's a drawing, it's a rendering that I did. The next day, March 12th, I woke up. I spent the day kind of going through all this stuff, like, wow, what did happen? And I contacted MUFON and asked if they had any reports from that night. And they said no. So I talked to the state director of Utah. And then I was walking in my office. I remember right where I was standing and I was next to my desk, and I kind of just went, it was like click, click. I had this momentary image of a map. I'll draw it here real quick. So in my mind, this is not much, but I saw this line on a map, It was very clearly southern Utah, and it had this would have been a yellow line. I've done a rendering of this, very accurate, and there were 3 points on a map. I knew right away that the westernmost point on the map was what had happened a day and a half before, when I slept out under the stars. And the other 2 events, wow, they sure play out like UFO abduction event. And one happened in 2010, and the other happened in 2011, and then the other happened in 2013. So 3 events in 4 years. When I pinpointed each spot on the map, which I'm very good at, and lined those up on the map, right? So you take any 2 points in a map, the 2 outside points, the most easternmost and the westernmost, and you put them on a line. They're always, you can create a straight line between any 2 points. But that 3rd point in the middle, what could have that been? So there was a point that happened on a little spot in southern Utah where I was with my friend Natasha. She's also had experiences similar to what I would feel I've had, like UFO contact experiences. So she was with me on this event that would have been in 2011, and it plays out. It seemingly feels like a UFO type event, but there was no UFOs in it. I'll tell it real quick. So we were sleeping on the side of the road. We were driving around the west. We had been to the conference just like before. So we had been at the conference, and then we coming home, and I was going to drive her all the way up to Idaho, and she was going to fly back. She's from Germany, and she was jet lagged. So we're on this total rural empty spot of the west, and she's jet lagged, and I'm laying there, and she wakes me up and says, Mike, I can't sleep. What can I do? And I said, take a walk. Go take a walk. It's a beautiful night. She says, is it safe? Are you serious? I'm like, oh, this is like, I'm very familiar with this part of the country. Like, you don't have anything to worry about walking around here. So she walked away, and I was listening to a great horned owl next to my head in this bush. And I did the same thing. I sat up and I was like, why can't I see this owl? It's loud. It's booming. It was loud, loud, loud. It was right in this bush next to me. And she was not very far away, a football field length away, maybe. We've sat together. We sat with maps and looked at it. And where were you standing? Where did you? She said the night was so beautiful and so calm, and the stars were so magnificent. It felt like I was sparkling. That's what she said. It felt like I was sparkling. So she's walking. She didn't need a flashlight. She had a flashlight with her. She didn't need it to walk on the road. She said it was so magical. The desert, the emptiness, the quiet. And then she looked off to the side of the road, and there was a hovering ball of light. First she thought it was someone with a flashlight. What is someone's got a flashlight here? And then it was an orb of light. And this orb comes towards her, and it gets a little bigger, and then she's like, and it goes, and it like flashes and gets really big, and it like explodes silently and is gone. And now she's like, whoa. I get like, she runs back to me. She wakes me up and says, Mike, we got to leave. She explains what happened. And okay, we get in the car. And I was scared. So we get in the car and drive away. Now, she saw a UFO, a floating orb, unidentified flying objects. It's floating, it's flying. I was listening to an owl. From her leaving to her coming back was maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes. It wasn't that far away. Noise in the desert on a still, calm night just carries forever. So that loud owl, she should have been able to clearly hear it from where she was. She wasn't that far away. So that doesn't make any sense to me. Now I'm going to back up again. This owl in the bush had the same kind of power that the coyote in 2013. Like, it was so close, I don't understand why I didn't see it. I'd say the same about the owl. It was so close. Why? It was right there. It was loud. It was like right, I couldn't see it. So I'm speculating cautiously, because I don't know for sure, but I'm like, wow, this is playing out more like what I would say like an auditory screen memory, not a visual screen memory, but an audio screen memory of this loud noise. She never heard the owl. That doesn't make sense. Now, but when I saw these 3 lines in the map, like, who staged that these lined up exactly, like I could zoom in on the map. Like in olden days, if you had a great big map of paper and you laid it on the floor and had a great big long ruler and a really sharp pencil, you could drag that pencil across the map, and that pencil line might be a mile thick.
And did this have any impact on you?
I gave up. Like, whatever doubts I had that this was real were gone just instantly. Like, I literally felt like I said, my old life ended and my new life has begun.
And that was, what year again was that, Mike?
2013. I give up. So I screamed uncle. I cried uncle, and I was like, this. So what happened from that point on was, one, that there was a tape loop in my head that I was unaware of, that had been playing for nearly a decade as I dealt with these experiences, which had been becoming more and more oppressive. And the tape loop was, this can't happen. This can't involve you. This is impossible. This can't happen. This can't involve you. And it was just playing endlessly. And then after that event, like clip, that tape loop just got disengaged from my head, tossed in the trash can, never reappeared. Not that my life got like easier, like it was challenging to make progress with this, but I didn't have that oppressive doubt anymore. Now, another thing that happened was I started writing the book, The Messengers, the blue book, which has sort of defined my life. And I started writing that book basically on March 12th, less than 48 hours after lying in the sand. I started writing that book. So what happened before, like I was coming home from a UFO conference and I love sleeping out in the desert. What happened after is I started writing the book that defined my life, which is this book here. This is the one, the blue one. It was 2013, so it was about 2 years of writing. And I had a lot of blog posts and a lot of research that I had done already, so I had a lot of material to work from for that book. So I had a bunch of owl experiences starting in 2006, and it went crazy. And it was showing up in a synchronistic form for the most part. I was synchronicities involving owls, lots of owl sightings, lots of personal owl sightings, or lots of like people would randomly contact me, and it would either have something to do with a UFO or an owl. It was crazy making. It was like off the charts, the level of synchronistic madness that started in around 2006.
Do you have a particular affinity for owls?
No, like I was living in a place with a lot of owls, and I thought they were fascinating birds. So I did have a little bit of an affinity, but nothing more than like, wow, isn't that cool? I just got to see an owl, which I had seen a handful of owls over the years. But then after this, it was a lot. So I started collecting the stories. Here's a real simple story. A guy named Derek gets a hold of me. We sat at a bar and he told me a story. And I mean, you must know this when someone tells you the story and you see them kind of like they're not at peace. Like it's like, this is a story that doesn't come out very often. So he was purging something as he told the story. And it wasn't much. He was camping in Arizona, and he's from the East Coast, which doesn't have the stars. Like the stars in the desert night are astounding. So he's just blown away by the stars. And him and his friends are looking up at the stars. And then they see an owl on a cactus looking down at them. They didn't see it fly in. They just looking up at it. It's like, wow, they both had the same sense, which I hear all the time. There's like something ominous about the presence of an owl. The bird simply has that mystique about it. So the owl flies off. Moments later, a triangle-shaped craft goes right above them and then flies down and hugs the landscape. He was like really struggling to try to define like the flight pattern of this. Like he was not an airplane. It was not a helicopter. It was not a balloon. And then after that, he had a bunch of other life events. If you're doing this type of research, you must know, like he said, oh, I had this dream where I was lifted out of my bed and floated through the wall. And then when I asked my wife about it, she said, oh, I didn't want to open my eyes because I knew you weren't in the bed. And then after this, he also said something which I take very seriously. I kind of dismissed it at the time, but it's become a pattern. He said, it was right after that I had a spiritual awakening. And you must see this in people's lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's the main fallout or outcome that is the ultimate experience, along with the many others unraveling. But that awareness is huge for people.
Yeah. So that's a very simple story. And it begins with, he sees an owl, and it ends with a spiritual awakening, where it keeps going on and on. And so I started asking for these stories right at the top of my website. It says, I want to hear your owl stories. When I do a talk like this, I say, hey, people, get a hold of me. I might not get back to you, but I read every letter and I do my very best to get back to people. And I'm getting, it ebbs and flows, but it's about 6 powerful owl stories a day.
A day.
And that's been going a day. And that,
wow.
Yeah, you do the math. Multiply that by 15 years. It's a lot. And sometimes it ebbs and flows. So if you're anywhere in the world, and this has been for over a decade, and you get on a search engine like Google and you type in UFO owl, about the next 25 things under it, you go to my site, it says, I want to hear your story. So anyone anywhere in the world has an experience with an owl and a UFO, they're going to find me in about 3 mouse clicks. And they're going to go right to my site. There's a form you fill out. So I've been just flooded. So there's other UFO researchers out there. Everyone's got their own little niche. Someone's looking at the government documents. Someone else is looking at UFO abduction. Someone else is looking at orange orbs or flying saucer reports. I mean, everyone's got their little specialty.
Yeah. And have you found out why owls are the most prominent motif, apart from deers, maybe coyote here and there, but why?
So you're asking, the screen memory aspect of the owl is what you're asking about. So the screen memory that's where deer and owls are kind of right at the top of the list. So the screen memory would be, it's very commonly reported, like, oh, I was driving home, the witness says, I was driving home at night and there was a 4-foot tall owl in the road. And I stopped my car and I was like, what is that owl doing? And then I kind of I drive past and it was very odd, but it wasn't that odd. And then they get home and it should have been midnight and it's 2 a.m. and they're like, where did that 2 hours of time go? And if they go through a hypnosis session, which I've talked to a lot of hypnotherapists about exactly this, and they essentially say that under the influence of hypnosis, the therapist will say, describe that owl in the road. And they'll say, well, it's got big black eyes, it's got a bald head, it's very skinny, it's got a little shiny uniform on, and I don't think that's an owl. So the implication is it's something else. I have a close friend. She had a powerful sighting when she was 19 years old. She was working at a summer camp for girls, and she had already been well aware that she had been having UFO contact type experiences, but they'd always happen at night. So she was well aware that she had had these experiences. And so she's in this social setting with a bunch of girls, and they're at a campsite, and she's out in the woods, and there's some people camped here, and there's some other people camped here, and they just needed the flat ground where they could set up their shelters. She was walking from one spot to another along a trail, and she could hear the girls in the background. She's a short walk between the 2 campsites. She turns a corner, full daylight. On the side of the trail is a gray alien with a big bald head. Full daylight. She's shocked. It looks at her. She looks at it. She's really funny. She's got a great way of explaining this. She says, all communication is telepathic with these beings. So I look at it, it looks at me, and I can hear its thoughts. It's panicking. And it looks at me and it goes, owl, 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 owl. And she watches it morph into a 4-foot tall owl. And it turns around and walks into the woods.
I would just wonder why they've chosen that particular creature.
It's about even Steven. The screen memory aspect is either a deer or an owl. Now, I've talked to Bud Hopkins, I've talked to Leo, I've talked to Dave Jacobs specifically about this. And I'd say, why owls? And they say, the owl kind of looks like a gray alien, right? It's kind of got the big eyes, it's kind of spooky. And I'm like, yeah, but it doesn't look much like a deer. I mean, deers have big black eyes, but it doesn't much. And the people report squirrels, people report firemen, people report clowns, people report Jesus shows up in the report. So it's like, well, I don't know, like it doesn't look like Jesus. So I would argue, which I'm doing this is a thought experiment because I simply cannot know, but I would argue that the owl is an archetype. The owl is an archetype that we have had all throughout human history, like the owl as a totem or the owl has a presence. People say, whoa, that's intense. Like, we all know that. No one has to teach you that. You don't have to read it in a book. Everyone knows that the presence of an owl has a heightened sense of power, let's say, compared to a bunny rabbit or a butterfly or something like that, So,
well, it has a gaze that kind of doesn't waver. It just absolutely locks on. Even a deer, that doesn't have the same kind of attribute.
Not at all.
So it's interesting why though.
But the owl is rich in mythic symbolism, right? So we have mythologies, we have folklore surrounding the owls. The owls is very closely associated with death in a lot of folklore, and it's very closely associated with wisdom in a lot of folklore. The wisdom comes from the goddess Athena, who had a companion owl, and Athena's from Greece, or in Greece, in that part of the Mediterranean, they have a little owl. It's called the little owl, and it is it's tiny, like 6-7 inches tall. So she's often seen with a tiny little companion owl. Supposedly, the Parthenon, which is the palace of Athena, there were little owls that supposedly roosted in the rafters. They speculate that that's how the folklore came to be. But that's the mythology thing fascinates me. Ancient man would have recognized that owls can fly into the night. They can fly in complete darkness. They can fly into the nighttime. They can fly through the forest in what we would call complete darkness. Ancient man would have said that is magic. Modern man says, oh, they have evolutionarily highly attuned eyes with special receptors to pick up on very, very, very faint light source. So they can fly in what we would call complete darkness. They can fly with complete freedom as if it was full daylight for them. So in the ancient man would say the owl would fly into the darkness. We live in a world with electric light bulbs. The night, even just a couple generations ago, would have meant something much different to mankind. A time of testing, a time of fear, a time of danger. So the owl flies into the darkness. And the next step is it enters, that becomes a metaphor for flying to the land of the dead, flying to the land of the gods, flying to the land of the ancestors, flying to that other realm. You take that one step further, it enters that realm and then returns with a message. That's where I got the title of the book, The Messengers. I mean, I was getting report after report after report. It was really common for people to say, oh, like the owl landed on a fence post in my backyard and I got a message. It spoke to me in my mind. And they would say, they would no longer call it the owl on the fence post in their yard. They would say the messenger. And that just showed up over and over and over. So the book became The Messengers, just organically like that. Now, that's the ancient mythology, is the owl as a messenger. It's present day. Harry Potter has an owl that delivers the mail. It's perfect. It's the ancient mythology playing out present day. And I don't know whether J.K. Rowling would be, she may have been well attuned to these ancient myths. Could have just came out of her creative. I would love to ask her. It might have emerged simply from the creative. I mean, I think there's a magic to that creative process. So it could have emerged out of that creative ether. I almost prefer that it was something that she just invented rather than she said, oh, I found this in a dusty old book on mythology. I'm just going to put it into my series of stories. So we have an archetype of the owl. I would say the owl is performing the role of an archetype. There are 5 things that I have found in my studies. Like, I haven't searched for these things. These things came to me. Like, I'm asking for them. So one is owls and UFO contact. Absolutely. It's not 100%. So if you see a UFO, it doesn't mean you're going to see an owl. And if you see an owl, it doesn't mean you're going to see a UFO. But let me tell you, it is a recognizable pattern in the UFO lore that owls show up around the time of contact. The next would be meditation. Got lots and lots of stories of people meditating and they close their eyes and they have an intention and they open their eyes and there's an owl either on the windowsill or they're outside. I have like stories of people meditating in the woods and the owl is like landed on the branch. So it's like 2 feet away from them when they open their eyes. This is like common. Owls meditation, owls in shamanic initiation. Doing this work, it constantly intersects with shamanism. So I'm in touch with a number of shamans, and I've really gone down the research avenue of shamanism. So it's well understood. When you're going through the induction process of becoming a shaman or the initiation process, you will see owls. Well understood in the shamanic communities. The other would be psychedelics, most particularly mushrooms. People will see owls. Sometimes they're visionary, right? So 50-foot tall, glowing white owl that talks, or it's a regular owl that like lands in the windowsill while you're in the throes of most often in a sort of ritual setting. Like, it's not just people partying to get stoned. They're taking the drug for the purpose of spiritual enlightenment or advancement or a ritual setting. And then the final one is owls and death. So the lore, the folklore of owls and death is that the owl will show up and will hoot. Like, hearing the hooting of an owl will foreshadow the death of a loved one, or the death of, that shows up in Shakespeare, that shows up in all kinds of, it's like a plot point. It just, I see it all the time. Like, there's some movie and they're in the forest at night and I hear this hoo-hoo, like some sound effect guy just put an owl in the background. I'm like, someone's going to die. Like, we are like, someone's going to die in this story. And then, 5 minutes later, one of the characters is offed. But that's not what I'm finding in my research. What I'm finding is, here's what plays out with great consistency. So someone's parent dies, and that child, often, an adult, that parent will die, and then an owl will show up at the house.
Amazing.
Their grieving will be alleviated interacting with the owl.
So, Mike, just tell us about the child and the owl.
What I'm getting is a lot of reports after someone's parent has died, most often a parent. I've got some other variation, but it's most often a parent. And an owl will appear to the child. They're often adults, right? they will interact with this owl as if it is their parent. So I have a story of a guy, his father died of a heart attack, and was late at night at the hospital, lots of issues, lots of things to do, dealing with the hospital, dealing with everything. His father's dead, very emotional. He walks out of the hospital. There's the doors that open up, and it's nighttime, and he's alone on the sidewalk by the hospital. And there on the grass next to the sidewalk is a little owl. And he stands and he talks to the owl and he says, "Dad, I love you. I miss you. I feel honored that you were my father. It's a blessing. Thank you so much for all you did." I have that story over and over and over and over and over. And people will say that the interacting with the owl, their grieving disappeared. Like the grieving process is ended, is punctuated with the owl.
That's
I have
so
a lot of stories like that.
fascinating, isn't it? Because
Just remarkable.
grief is a huge thing. And if that also goes unresolved or hangs around like this background smog in your life, a lot of problems. So that's brilliant.
The UFO mystery, it's got like, there's dark stories, there's scary stories, there's government conspiracy stories, there's stories where that play out like you're dealing with demons, there's terror, there's trauma. What I'm finding, like, I'm not looking at the big totality of the UFO mystery. I'm looking at this little thin sliver that is owls and how they are related to this mystery. And I'm pulling on this thinnest thread, like this big, wide, complex mystery. I'm not worried about that. I'm just pulling on this thin little thread. And what I have found is it's heartening, right? So I've still got some scary stories in there, but a scary story doesn't make it a bad story. Like, I did not expect to step into the field of research and have a benevolent set of stories emerge. But that's what I've found.
I'm going to talk just momentarily about my work with the Eclectia album, which comprises researchers and musicians, singer-songwriters who have all had experiences of one kind or another with the ET phenomenon. I wanted to bring together this eclectic group of people and this eclectic genre of music, and to give people an opportunity to tell their stories through their songs. And the guy who did the album, Dan Vallely, also a graphic designer, he created this. And then speaking to Mike, he said, "You do know there's an owl there." It kind of didn't register with me. And so now it does. So thank you for bringing that to my attention, Mike. And one of the other people who's on the album is John Martin, who's our classical guitarist, played for Jimmy Carter. Just incredibly deep relationship with his friends who use the stratosphere as their highway and wherever else they come from. And he often films them. But tell the story, Mike, of him filming and what else he filmed.
So his website has, like, it's kind of in two different things. He's got lots and lots of footage of him playing classical guitar. It's beautiful. This is someone who's achieved mastery at this beautiful art. And then the other part is him with a handheld video camera at night, just like hours and hours and hours of footage of, some of it, I got to be careful. Some of it is just, doesn't look like much, right? So it's just a little pinpoint of light moving through the nighttime sky. He's in Georgia, and so he's shooting at night in Georgia. And so what happens here, if you see this little clip that I'm talking about, it doesn't look like much, but if you watch the whole totality of the video, the little dot, does make some dramatic motions. And then I've looked at other of his footage. Some of it is very compelling. So, but what this short little clip, someone sent it to me and said, "Oh, you got to look at this. Is one of the nice things about being in this internet world, in a sense." So I had been on the search I wanted to find a picture of an owl and a UFO in the same picture together. I have people videotaping UFOs and an owl hoots in the background. That's pretty good. But I wanted an owl and a UFO in the same picture. And he narrates it. It's almost like a little sing-songy kind of way. He goes like, "Oh, my fabulous friends. Oh, thank you, my fabulous friends. Oh, joyous." He's kind of got this, he just kind of goes on and on.
The best time filming, isn't he?
Yes, you can see you can hear the smile on his face. Exactly. And then there's a little dot, and there's a tree kind of on one side of the frame. And this owl bursts out of the tree and flies and crosses. And let me tell you, like, I isolated the one frame, and I was like, that owl passes directly between the camera and the dot of light in the sky, and then so basically the owl touches the UFO visually. Obviously the UFO is much farther away, and then the owl swoops back again. It's very clearly an owl in the frame.
Yeah.
Hey, lovely ones. Oh, Scrooge. What did I say? My dear sweet friends, absolutely beautiful. Hey, thank you, beautiful ones. Thank you, my dear sweet friends. Thank you. Now that was awesome. My hawk. How beautiful. You saw it too, didn't you, dear friend? Of course you did. Of course. Oh, right there. Look at how gorgeous you are. Oh, beautifully done. How wonderful. Have a beautiful night, and thank you so much. That's gorgeous. Thank you. Thank you. Now that was awesome. My hawk. How beautiful.
And wow, was that beautiful. Into the creative process.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't invent the owl connection to UFOs, right? That had been in the lore.
That you brought it to people's awareness, which is great, and thank you for doing that.
I'm the one who went crazy, I guess is the way I want to say it. I got super obsessed, yeah.
So let's talk about some of the synchronicities that have been happening, because that's huge as well.
So what I've found is, like, I'm doing research. The core of my research, I would say, is UFO abduction. I use that word a lot. There's other words. Like, abduction is a rough word, right? It's got, like, you go to jail, you abduct someone, like, the police have every right to arrest you and put you in jail. So, UFO contact, whatever term you want to use. I talk to people all the time on the phone that if you only watched kind of lowbrow documentaries, you would think that, abduction means being taken onto a craft, you get put on a table, there's creepy medical exams, it's super terrifying, and then you get put back in your bed or put back in your car. I've heard those stories, but it is so rare that I hear those stories from people who claim this direct experience that it's essentially zero, right? Essentially, I mean, the percentage of people who tell me, I have a memory of being on a table, or I went through hypnosis and I have a memory of being on a table and having a medical exam. I've talked to the people who've had this happen, but it is minuscule compared to the number of people who say, I have experienced synchronicities of such profound intensity that it has shattered my definition of reality. That is normal for the people who are having these experiences. I would say that's also probably normal of anyone who's going on a spiritual quest, let's say. Well, there's a woman, Katie Walker. She was a documentary filmmaker. She was doing a documentary on synchronicity. That was the theme of the documentary. It's a really beautiful, creative documentary. It's called Time is Art. And it's worth watching. It's not very long. It's beautifully produced, highly creative in the way they approach the subject. So they were in San Francisco, and there's a neighborhood in San Francisco that has all these beautiful murals. So they're part of it is interviewing the person who's been experiencing a lot of synchronicities, and they're in San Francisco. So they cut to the murals. So they showed the murals there's a lot of owls in these murals, and they were getting these close-ups of owls in the murals as this consistent theme. And the cameraman sets the camera down, and they're not even looking at it. They didn't find it until the editing. The camera was still on. They set it down, and it was just pointing off sideways. And there is this oddly shaped UFO coming down silently in the sky, and it goes behind a tree. It's just like 2 or 3 seconds. It's remarkable footage. It's not a balloon. It's not a helicopter. It's not a paper bag flying in the wind. It's something, wow, is it impressive. So she's doing a documentary on synchronicity, talking to a person who's had a lot of owl experiences, and they've got owls all over the art. So they're videotaping owls for a documentary on synchronicity, and they capture a UFO. This is so normal.
What about yourself? What have you had some, synchronicities that have blown you away?
It's too many to even begin. So here, I'll tell you one. So my old girlfriend. So I was living in this very small town, and my old girlfriend, we had a wonderful it was a very short chapter. I'm not going to use her name. I'll call her Carol. That's what I call her in the book. We broke up, and she ended up getting married. She has a couple of kids, and I'm at my house. This is in rural Idaho, which is like kind of cowboy Western terrain. And I see this, and there's like a bike path. So I get on my bike path and I'm riding to town, and there's Carol and her kids. And we talked. I hadn't seen her in a long time. And she said, oh, spent a lot of time hiking and stuff like that. And she said, when we would go out hiking, I was just always amazed. We always saw such wonderful wildlife. We saw bears and moose, and it was really wonderful. So, and then I said, I've been doing this research on owls. She had no idea what I meant. I went through a period where I was seeing so many owls in around 2009. I actually went out into the woods all alone, and I spoke aloud to the universe. Basically, I prayed, and I said, I'm not going to pay attention to an owl unless it crosses my path. And then the next day I'm riding my bike in town, and then this owl is on a tree over there, and it flies right across my path the next day. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to pay attention if they cross my path. Some owl on a fence post way over there, that doesn't count. So I'm riding the bike on the bike path, and I'm with her two little kids, and she's got like the baby stroller thing, or she's pushing the baby stroller and running with it. She's kind of jogging. And so all of a sudden I see this way up ahead, and the kids are up ahead. And so I'm like, oh, I'm going to show I get the kids, and I saw an owl. Let's see if we can find it. So we go and we follow the bike path. And I said, it went right into this batch of trees here. So we get on the bike path, and we set our bikes down. There's a great horned owl in a tree, and it's right there. And the little kids are it's close. This is as close as I've ever been to a big owl. And it's right there. And we sit and watch this thing for a few minutes. It's windy, right? And the owl's feathers are fluttering. And it was just a remarkable sighting. Now, Carol, where the car was parked, was just a little right there, right near this thing, but she didn't get all the way up to us. So the kids are with me. We're looking at the owl. And this is a really odd thing, which I don't want to read too much into this. So the one girl was young, and Carol says, come on, kids, let's get in the car. And the one girl says, Mom, do you love Mike? Do you love Mike? And she says, no, we're just friends. And she's like, do you love Mike? So we're standing at this owl, looking at this owl. She says this this beautiful, it was totally in this place of innocence. There was no tiny little girl, totally in this place. But wow, did that event carry a powerful, beautiful, it was just a beautiful event. Yeah, I don't know how else to say it. I didn't read too much into it. Wow, did that change the tenor of this owl experience completely?
Wow.
It was not lost on me, the beauty and power of that magical moment. Yeah.
How fascinating it is. Also, just on the regression side of things, sometimes it's discovered through regression, is that we get to recognize, like you with your father in this life, the father from previous life, that we have soul groups and other people who come in, not just for lessons, but for companionship, for a lot of different things, and to share information or to bear witness with us to things. And I think the witness thing is quite big. So before we wrap up, and thank you very much for your time, and it's been absolutely fascinating. Hardly scratched the surface here, but we're just trying to get, kind of a snapshot of you and your work.
So here, let me just add one extra little detail here. This is something that I'm thunderstruck by. So when I talk to people who have had UFO and owl experiences, I talk to them on the phone. I'll write in the corner of the page, I'll keep some notes, and I'll ask it at some point, what are you doing for work? And they'll say, it's not 100%, but they'll say, oh, I'm a Reiki therapist, or I just got my Reiki certification. And I would argue, I would love to crunch the numbers and really know, but anecdotally, I would say that half the people, 50% of the people who, easily 50%, might be more, that have had a UFO and owl experience are doing Reiki therapy. That's remarkable to me, because I'll tell you, half the general population is not doing Reiki therapy.
But also, I find that people who've had experiences as well, I mean, I know I've already stated this, that the impact on them changes them wholly. And if they aren't doing stuff like Reiki or other energy, for anybody who doesn't know, it's a Japanese form of energy healing, using symbols, not touching the body. But there's so many different systems of healing, and I find that quite a lot of people are creative. And I always remember, just talking about the creativity and the UFO connection, that Grant Cameron, who also makes some interesting commentary about his book, or Tuned In, The Paranormal World of Music, on eclectia. He said that when he was lecturing to, a group of golfers, he said just as a test, he asked them all to raise their hands if anybody had ever had anything to do with UFOs, and there wasn't anybody. And he said, but when I started working out the musician thing, he said, I began to think that every single musician, and you could say also artist maybe, but certainly musician, have been on board a craft or had some link with UFOs. I mean, he said, I begin to think every single one had.
I used to ask, I used to have like this list of questions. The questions I ask when I contact people are, what was happening leading up to the event? What happened after? How has your life changed? How would you rate your psychic skills? Do you have healing abilities? Those 5.
I often ask those in different ways, but yeah.
And then I used to ask, are you a creative type? And I don't bother asking anymore because it was 100% or like near 100%. So I'm like, why am I bothering asking? Because I already know the answer. Yeah.
Would you say psychic skills since you have become aware, or?
I have had powerful psychic events. I cannot control them. I know some people who can just basically say, oh, let me read your aura, or let me look into your, let me do a psychic reading for you. I can't do that. I get these psychic events. I know, they're unbelievably clear to me. And I know in that moment that this is gonna pan out. This is gonna prove true.
Is that kind of a prophetic element? Is that what you're saying?
That's the thing that I talked about where I had the flash and saw the line in the map. It's a perfect example. It's rare. I can go for years without having it, but when I have it, I have a lot of psychic dreams where dreams show up and some insignificant element, often absurdly insignificant, will show up in that day's event. Yeah. So that kind of stuff. I'm not in the major leagues as far as psychic abilities, but I have enough of them that I recognize that this is a true phenomenon within my life, though I cannot control it the way some psychics can. No, and I've gone through some hypnosis stuff, and the beings that seem to appear in hypnosis are the grays. It feels like I have been, if the way I describe it is if it's a detective novel, right? And the detective finds the bullet casing in the bushes in chapter 1, he didn't need to go back to the bushes in chapter 5 and find the bullet casing again. Either you found the clue or you didn't.
Yeah.
So I feel like I've got the intelligence or the behind the phenomena is very stingy with me as far as those kinds of things. They're giving me lots of other stuff, but they're very stingy with the UFO sightings and the UFO, actually seeing beings and stuff like that. So they show up in my dreams. I've been flooded with enough other stuff that I'm no longer doubting the reality of
your artwork has been augmented in any way?
No, that's always been there since I was a little kid. I can say is probably what it has helped me do is when I was doing blog posts and working in books and stuff like that, if I had to explain something that's visual and complicated, I would just draw it.
Yeah, great.
That's much easier for me. So I'll just here's the draw. I'll just draw the sighting. I recognize that that you can get a lot more information in a simple illustration than you could trying to write off paragraphs of text describing something visually. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, give us some details of your website, your 4 books now, but if you just mention those.
So there's 4 books that I have out on owls, which I wrote all within the last decade, which is kind of mind-blowing for me. So I threw myself fully into the writing process, and I have drawn almost nothing in the last 10 years. I've put all my creative energies into the writing. So I still can draw. I can pick up a pen and draw something. It doesn't really interest me right now. I'm much more engaged with the writing process. And the 4 books this is the first one in the Owl series. This is called The Messengers. That's the first one. And that came out in 2015. And that was where I tried to make the argument that owls and UFOs are connected. And then there's a couple more books in that series. One is called Stories from the Messengers, which is more complex stories that didn't fit into the first book. And another one is called Hidden Experience. And those are blog posts that were like a sort of memoir told through blog posts. At the time that I was writing in the blog, somewhat compulsively, I was also going through sort of an awakening experience. So that's actually pretty interesting. People who have not had the contact experience will read that book and they'll get back to me and say, I didn't get it. But people who have had the contact experience, or let's say I don't want to say the abduction experience, but that's essentially what I'm implying. People who haven't read that book, Hidden Experience, they're like, whoa, you articulated what I could not tell my wife, what I can't tell my boss. You've told my story for me. I get that a lot, and that means a lot to me. So that 3rd book is for a very slim niche audience, but the people who are gravitate to it. And then I got it. This is the one that just came out actually almost a year ago. And this is a fiction book, The Unseen. And that's actually doing pretty well. The audiobook just came out for that. When I talk to people, they'll say, here's my story. And they'll tell me a story. And then at the end, they'll say, have you ever heard anyone tell a story like that? Oftentimes I can say, yeah, I've heard exactly that story. Other times I can say, I have not heard that exact story, but I am very familiar with the flavor and the mood of the stories that emerge. What you shared has that flavor and mood. And so I tried to write a fiction book that was imbued with that flavor and mood of that high strangeness, that synchronistic overlap, the kind of dream language that shows up in these contact events. So that was the fiction book.
And give us your website.
The easiest way is just mikeclelland.com. And if you can't remember that, you can just Google UFOs, owls, and I come. And all my books are available on Amazon, and they're easy to find through that website, which is mikeclelland.com. And that'll take you to some illustration work, and that'll also take you to the books and stuff like it's kind of a main hub.
Well, Mike Clelland, thank you very much. Fascinating stuff. Thank you for staying on it with us, and we made it.
It's been my honor.
Thank you.